Well, thank you for attending this panel, and this topic has been very important, especially in the West. You know, when Western journalists always come and ask me what's going to happen to the women now that the Islamists, have took over. So it's a really great and important topic to analyze and look at from our tradition, from the revolutionary socialist tradition, and because really, like, it's not. There is no revolution in the world that women weren't like essential part of. They were in the front lines. They have been like the engine of this revolution. And I mean, on every level and every sector, you see women being the most militant group and being on the forefront just as much as men, and even at some times sacrificing more for being discriminated against. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of an overall perspective of what happened when it comes to the role of women throughout the year and a half, but also the role of women in paving the road to this revolution. This picture is very, it says it all, really. These are the textile workers from Mansoura, Spain, in which they started striking in about 2006, but it was a lot of amount of strikes that took place following that. And as you can see here, they're just like facing the riot police like men, or even better sometimes, as I like to say. Yes, they fought the management, they fought the police. So really, there is no separation when it comes to resistance and militancy. When it comes to women, I don't like to talk about women in a special way, because they have been part of this revolution. They have been part of the opposition, and not because they are veiled or they seem oppressed, as some Westerners like to believe. To me, these are the strong women that have fought and will fight again and are essential in winning this revolution. Later on, in the 18 days and following, and especially when we come to the first incident post-revolution, on March 9th, 2011, that's when, following the International Women's Day, when women held a protest and was pretty much, interrupted by whether civilian clothes informants or men that were in civilian clothes, but many believe that they were pushed on by the police, since this normally does happen before the revolution, where women female protesters are sexually harassed or assaulted during protests. And we can remember the Black Wednesday that was on the 25th of May in 2005, when large number of women were brutally sexually assaulted by police thugs and raped pretty much in the streets. So whenever women attempted to kind of take part in protest as being women, they were called like they're agents of the West. They want to try to copy like Westerners, and these are not Egyptian ideals. These are ideals from abroad, as if women rights is something of in America, and that's it. But when women have stepped up, aside from the revolution, and tried to move on, calling for their own right, they started getting all these reactions of, this is not the time, we must wait for the revolution first, or let's take down the dictator, and then we'll try to postpone this issue later. This is not the time. And I completely disagree with that. This is the time. This is the time to fight for every oppressed group. Whether it would be women, whether it be working class, whether it be gays, whether it be any other oppressed, this panel is called the Festival of the Oppressed, and that is the revolution. It is the Festival of the Oppressed, and if women are oppressed, then absolutely it is the right time to fight for more rights for women and for human rights in general, but we can't separate it from what's going on. You know, even some women who believe that maybe we should start a women's council and defend the women council and all of this, and it tends to blur away the connection, the deep connection that is in the system of why women are oppressed in the Middle East, or why the Christians are oppressed, and they all have a common denominator, is that the system that is the root of all of these oppressions. And we can see that following the events when they unfold. I don't know how many of you read or came across this article that the colonial feminist Mona Tahawi wrote, Why Do They Hate Us? And she was referring to how men hate women, and that's why Middle Eastern women are oppressed in the Middle East. I completely disagree with that, and I think it's bullshit, basically. Women are oppressed not because men hate them, not because there is this biological thing or a religious or a culture discourse that is going and being brainwashed into people and acting violently against women. I mean, if you have been following the revolution and you see images like this, hold on, like this, where army soldiers are beating, dragging, stripping, and sexually harassing women on the street. Is this because these soldiers hate this girl for being a woman, or do they overtly hurt her because she is protesting for what is right, for the revolution, because she's a revolutionary? It's very dangerous to think that because these are men and that's a woman, and it wouldn't happen otherwise if it was a man or if it wasn't any other person, whether she's veiled or not veiled. It doesn't really matter about what you wear or what you believe in or what religion you practice. It's really about where you politically stand. This girl especially, she was at a protest fighting the police, fighting the military, and because she is standing for what is just and for what the revolution stands for, she gets treated like this. This is another picture of a girl who is obviously not veiled being treated the same time. So we can't say, it's all the liberal women or the unveiled women or the Christian women who get beaten up or the religious ones. No, it doesn't really matter about that. So the first incident following, and I'll go back to those pictures to explain more, but one of the first incidents that we saw female protesters being discriminated against and being picked out because they are women were the March 9th in the Egyptian Museum, where about 17 girls were held hostage in the Egyptian Museum, beaten up and tortured, and got their virginity checked as part of a conduct that is held supposedly. What the army tried to say is that we want to make sure that these were not pure girls, who were protesting, so they can then say these girls or female protesters in Tahrir, they're not real protesters, they're prostitutes or something, as if that virginity had anything to do with it. Of course, the practice is sexual abuse and it's complete torture. And out of the 17 girls, you got Samira Ibrahim, whose graffiti is on top. She's this girl, very sweet girl. She wasn't very politically active before the revolution. She's from south of Egypt, which is more largely conservative. But she's the only person out of the 17 girls who filed the complaint and filed the lawsuit against the military, and calling for the prosecution of this doctor who was not a doctor, who was only a military personnel there, who conducted these violent acts on the girls. And thankfully, she won the court case to ban all this, to ban the virginity check conduct within the military. So this was a real win for the revolution. Of course, the law doesn't mean anything because the practice can still happen, but the fact that we instituted that in the law is definitely a great win to women and to the revolution. So this, and the slogan, Samira Ibrahim in Egypt has become really an icon, and I think even internationally, where she is the girl who fought an army. And this is kind of the graffiti in Muhammad Mahmoud Street that showed that. This is another graffiti of Samira Ibrahim being saluted, saying, the girl who is from the Sa'id, from Upper Egypt, who fought the army and exposed all this injustice. Going back to one of the major events that really was a turning point when it comes to women in the revolution was the Occupy cabinet clashes. The Occupy cabinet clashes took place around December. It was late December, and it was following the November uprising, where many people were fighting the police on Muhammad Mahmoud Street, and the sit-in continued until they really they kidnapped one person and badly tortured him, and that kind of started this confrontation between military officers who were around the ministerial cabinet at the time and the protesters who were sitting in. And that day was when we saw repeatedly women, especially for the first time, being targeted out within the clashes and being badly beaten, like this one, and like the other one as well, like this one. This is Sana, who is the sister of Mona Saif. You might know her. She's the girl, the activist who started the No Military Trials for Civilians group, and that's her sister who is part of the No Military Trial group. And every testimony from these clashes was evident that the soldiers were psychologically charged, basically, of thinking that these rioters or these protesters are their enemies, like they must kill them. The amount of force that was used, especially against girls, was tremendous and was unprecedented. You can see here also that they were beating niqabi women, so it didn't really matter whether the women, were veiled or were Muslim or were Christians or how they looked like. Everybody was being targeted, and especially women. Following that, why this was a turning point? Because we got to see for the first time the reaction within the revolutionary bloc, like where revolutionaries started to honor the girl or the women in the revolution. There were many graffitis made for like Sitt al-Banat, which is because the girl who was being dragged was anonymous, like nobody knew who she was or who that person is. So they decided to call her Sitt al-Banat, which means the girl of all girls, like the queen kind of. It's not exact translation, but this is a girl who is not her, but a depiction of her, and naming her Sitt al-Banat. We also see pictures like this, graffitis like this, where it says "El-Bint zay al-Walad," meaning the girl is equal to the boy, and it's like a beaten up girl, saying that women are sacrificing just as much as men. We get a campaign initiated by activists and against sexual harassment. Now let me talk a little bit about sexual harassment in Egypt, because almost every girl like, and I'm not exaggerating, walking in the street at some point in her life, if not every day, will be at least verbally sexually assaulted. So you would be walking, going about your business, and some guy would be like, "Oh, nice ass," or whatever. It's just, it happens all the time. However, in Tahrir Square especially, and this got a lot of international press, sometimes Tahrir would be infiltrated by civilian clothed police thugs or people who are forced into the square to exactly do that, to sexually harass girls, assault them, try to make it very uncomfortable for a girl to be in Tahrir. And this initiated a big campaign from activists to do like a blogging day against sexual harassment, like end sexual harassment. Not necessarily just that has to do with politics, but also just in the normal daily life of every Egyptian walking in any street that has nothing to do with protest or so on. But especially in Tahrir, and especially when it comes to protest. So in early June of this year, there was a protest held, and it was anti-sexual harassment, and it was somewhat of a big turnout. And this was one of the few times that women have organized a protest for, women. I mean, there were some men there, but not as much as women. And this protest was badly beaten up and sexually harassed by thugs, by, again, civilian close informers that we know for sure are working with the police, because it was systematic, and they kept going with this violent act until like some girls were completely naked, where their clothes were ripped, they were beaten up, including journalists, including activists, and some of them are my friends, and they're still like trying to be okay from this horrific experience. So we must put an end to this. We must put an end to this, and how we can put an end to this is that the revolution must continue, and we have to win. There is no separation between the women's rights and human rights or the revolution. They're all linked, and when the revolution will succeed, women will have the rights, but we have a long way to go, and we can't say you have to wait, we have to put this as a secondary demand, women's rights, this is not the time. No, it is the time now. It is the time to have the debate, to see where this oppression is coming from, to really break the system that is doing all this violent acts against women. And I will just end with this picture because it really says it all. This was at the Ministry of Defense sit-in, which was initiated by a lot of the Salafis youth, or those who are, supporters of Salah Abu Ismail, which that was a whole bad thing. But they were at the Ministry of the Defense, and the clashes started against the police, and it was really horribly, horrible use of force against protesters. I'm very proud that the Revolutionary Socialists decided to endorse this this sit-in, despite all the liberals who said, oh, these are Salafis and Muslim Brotherhood, and the army, they can have their fit and will just sit at home and watch. If this woman who's a niqabi, who's fighting the army, throwing tear gas back at the police, I will fight with this woman no matter what she's wearing. I will make her. To me, this is not an oppressed woman like Mona Tahawi would like to say. To me, this is a militant revolutionary woman who I am proud to fight against the army and against the system. So whenever you see those headlines of, Islam is taking over and hijacking the revolution, or oh my God, what's going to happen to the women? Just think of that picture, and you'll know exactly where the revolution is heading. Thank you very much.
Hi there. I'm so glad we've got this picture still up. Thank you so much. It's so great to follow you and try and fit some of the events in Russia that I'm going to talk about into what she's just been talking about, events which took place long before the days of Twitter and live screening and 24/7 rolling news. It was on December the 1st last year, the day after the biggest strikes in British history, that I decided I really should start rewriting my biography of Kollontai. It first came out over 30 years ago when we first began to be interested in her writings on the sexual revolution and the family and her life as a revolutionary and in the first Bolshevik government in 1917. For the women's liberation movement of the 70s, born of the resistance to racism, war and male chauvinism, equal pay seemed within our grasp. Which one? The technological advances of contraception and safer abortion, which was legalised in 1968, gave us a new control over our bodies, and the slogan "the personal is political" was a radical challenge both to traditional politics and conventional and traditional socialist politics, which saw our struggle as based exclusively in the workplace. Her vision, Kollontai's vision of a more collective way of living and working, and her insistence that our class politics are not in some separate box from our sexual politics, made it possible for our personal experiences to become part of the struggle in a completely new way, and gave the struggle a new solidarity. And as we built for last November, as I was running around town with bags full of strike leaflets, I had a short story of hers mixed up with them, given to me by a comrade actually over there who that I was reading, and I had a sense it was time to rediscover her. Just say a bit about the story, which she wrote in 1922, called Soon. It's set in an idealised Soviet commune 48 years in the future, in 1970, just as we were beginning to discover her over here. And it's just a very short story. It describes a party the young people there throw for the older generation to share their memories of the world revolution, which has already swept capitalism away. The Bolsheviks in 1917, so it was only 5 years after the revolution of 1917, the Bolsheviks hadn't promised heaven on earth, just bread for the hungry cities, land to the peasants, and an end to war. But they also knew that without an international revolution they would fail. And the commune in her story, so it's a very short story, as I say, and very slight in a way, but the commune in her story is really important, I think, because it stands not just for the Soviet commune, but as it struggled against capitalist encirclement in the 20s, but for the whole world in which capitalism has been swept away, along with private property and war and profits. And so now, 40 years later, after that story was set, the revolutions in the Middle East and Egypt are bringing all these issues that the Bolsheviks were talking about and Kollontai was writing about back onto the agenda again. And when we come out in October, on October the 20th, which will be massive, we'll be marching in solidarity with revolutionaries everywhere whose struggles are ours too. So a bit about her life then as a revolutionary. She joined the revolution as an underground fundraiser for the great strike movement that swept Tsarist Russia in the 1890s, when a whole generation of previously downtrodden, largely illiterate and submissive women suddenly erupted in rage at their inhuman working conditions, low pay and sexual harassment of the bosses. Demands for maternity benefits and equal pay began to appear on strike leaflets. And Kollontai saw how many of these women, having found the courage to take on the bosses, were drawn into the wider revolutionary movement and into a political understanding of their oppression. These women were the inspiration for all her later work as an organizer and writer. She took issue with a depoliticized bourgeois feminist movement in Russia then that wanted to isolate women from their class. And her writings were part of a rich socialist tradition that saw, that looked at the specific nature of women's oppression and inequality in class society. Marx, Bebel and Engels had all described how in drawing them into the workforce, capitalism impinged on areas of their life far removed from wage labour, creating divisions between work and the home, the family, the public and the private, women and men. Kollontai went further, challenging socialists to engage with the great changes that revolution was bringing into every aspect of people's personal lives as they broke with old ways of thinking and behaving and the stranglehold of the Orthodox Church. For her, it was inconceivable that the new society revolutions were fighting to create would succeed if people were still imprisoned in the old nuclear family and women's needs at work and home weren't addressed. And as a commissar in 1917, she backed her progressive views on sexual liberation and socialist morality with a very practical programme of state-supported childcare and communal canteens to free women from their double burden as workers and mothers, and the hours of back-breaking housework they had to do after their work in the factories. So, in the 1890s, the strikers were jailed and exiled, and the revolution was beaten back, surging forward again in 1905 and again in 1917. In 1905, thousands of women came out on strike, raiding the food shops, looting and burning the landlords' estates. In March 1917, it was women who led Russia's democratic revolution that toppled the Tsar, pouring onto the streets of Petrograd and into the soldiers' garrisons and urging the soldiers to lay down their arms and join them. And once they got a taste of revolution, they became some of the bravest fighters after October, learning to handle rifles, joining the Red Army to defend the Bolsheviks against the invading armies of the capitalist West. This massive civil resistance had a global resonance and raised hopes all over the world in distant countries that a better social system was possible. And now, as austerity throws millions in Europe into poverty, women face a disproportionate burden of the cuts and are expected to take over the services no longer to be covered by the state. Of the 2 million people who came out on strike last November, something like 70% were women fighting for our jobs and pensions, exposing the lies that describe the family as the bedrock of society while making family life unsustainable, and that seeking to limit abortion and sex education is something about the right to life rather than an attempt to control our fertility and sexuality, and that the grotesque pornification of our bodies is some sort of new sexual freedom. The sexual freedoms we fought for in the 70s have been hijacked and have brought a new oppression into our lives, and so many gains and hopes have been pushed back. But also there is capitalism. We see capitalism also producing a whole new generation of women who see the issue, for whom issues of rape, domestic violence, and the sex trade have a vital connection to class, and see capitalism's inability to give us a future and want something different. And I would just talk a bit about the way, just as a sideline, the way that the crimes, it's having read a lot of Cold War literature, obviously, about Russia. I mean, most of the stuff written in the West is obviously Cold War. And, of course, it's very conventional and convenient to describe crimes committed in the Soviet era as an inevitable result of abandoning the laws of the market. But, you know, we see as the world capitalist system breaks down before our eyes the lie that only the market can guarantee civilized values and human rights. So,
sorry, can you speak up a bit more?
Sorry?
Just in the microphone.
Well, here, that room.
Thanks very much.
So we're fighting capitalism now. The fact is that capitalism existed in Russia in 1917, but it wasn't capitalist. And Lenin said if the Bolsheviks, that if a viable capitalist alternative to Tsarism had existed in Russia, then the Bolsheviks would have failed, just as Liebknecht and Luxemburg failed in Germany when the Kaiser was overthrown, but there was no October. But what it did have, of course, was fabulous resources of coal, iron, wheat, and the unimaginable untapped wealth of Siberia. And for 4 years, people fought to drive out the invading armies of 17 countries, desperate that a sixth of the world's surface wasn't removed from colonial plunder. They were driven out, and in those desperately hard years, in many aspects of Soviet life, we see almost as a model, a rough and ready model of how communist society could be afterwards. War communism meant that colonized program of canteens and creches went on in a very, very rough and ready way, but it was a sort of model of collective living. It did reflect some of our ideas, and of course we all know that some of the most progressive legislation after the almost immediately after the revolution, in the years afterwards, involved women simplifying the marriage law, legalizing homosexuality in 1922 and abortion in the same year. And I'm just going to come back to this story, which is what I started with. And what started me on the whole idea of rewriting the biography, because I think that she had a vision of life after her ideas and her work all came out of the strike movement and the revolution, and I had a real sense that they could feed back into the strike movement and the revolution now. And she had a vision of how life could be as we struggle to get rid of capitalism. She actually had a vision, rather partial and inadequate in some ways, but she did have a vision of how life could be afterwards. And I think that's what we have to sort of hold on to as we're looking at all this and what's going to happen afterwards. Kollontai has some ideas about that, and we might call it utopian, but we have to dream, don't we?
I want to thank you for these wonderful introductions. It's so important also for women in Austria, because when the war on terror started, they started it because they do it for human rights, women's rights, and so on. And it was very important for us to be side on side in the anti-war movement, Muslims and non-Muslims, but in the female movement, the feminist movement, there is a strong idea about these dirty ideas of Islamophobia, and also there are ideas, these old-style ideas from the bourgeois feminists about the borders are between if you are a woman or a man, not between the classes and so on. And now it's very easy for us to arguing, and it's easy for us to arguing against this sexism, against Muslim women, and it's easier for us to arguing for class struggle and not sex struggle. And it's very useful for us because we made a very important point last year, in the year of revolution. We have a completely new situation. We had 100 years Women Day, and we had 20,000 women and men on the streets, and it was so important before we had this campaign. We had in the Union Front a big debate about can the men go with us, about Islam and so on, and at the end we won the argument, and it was very useful for us to have this revolution. And and I think that's the point. And I think it's very, very clear for everyone. I have nothing together with Angela Merkel. I have a lot of things together with my comrade. But the ideas in the heads, they are still there. And now you can see it in the practice, how useful it is. How useful is it? What have we together with the women from Mubarak? I don't know her first name, or Susan, or Hossam. I have everything together with Hossam and nothing with her. And I think so we can go outside and make very clear where we stand, what's the strategy forward, and how to end this fucking system. Thanks a lot.
I'm really glad that Gigi's pictures started with the Mansoura España strikers, who have been absolutely inspiring. One of the many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women workers who've led struggles in the workplace. And that's what I wanted to talk about really briefly, because as well as the incredible heroism we've seen this year of the street fighting and women in the front line of that, there has been since 2006 the rise of a generation of women fighters and leaders in the workplace. And I wanted very quickly to read out actually something that was an interview that I did with one of the women who's the founder of the Independent Union of Maintenance and Technical Workers at Cairo Airport. And this is on the Men of Solidarity website if you want to see the video. And I wanted to give it because it gives a flavour of the struggles that are going on in the workplace and how women there are fighting and leading for the revolution. And she's called Naamat, and she says, my name is Mrs. Naamat Mohammed Gerber from the Maintenance and Technical Works Company at Cairo International Airport, Egypt Air. Of course, I always used to talk about politics at work. And I was always opposed to the old regime. I saw the privatisations and the protests by the lawyers, the textile workers and the property tax collectors. I was angry about everything which was happening in the country. I started going down to Tahrir Square during the revolution. Straight after that, I found the Independent Union, so I'm one of the founders of the Independent Union here in the airport. She said they faced a lot of victimisation and so on. They said that they faced disciplinary procedures and the sack. The director tried to exclude her by sending her away to distant workplaces. But I carried on with my trade union work, and that is because of the martyrs of the 25th January Revolution. The martyrs paid with their lives the price of reforming this country. Shame on all of us trade unionists if we let this country fall down, and if we keep up our work building the unions, it will be one of the reasons for the country's success. I think she expresses perfectly what we want to see in terms of the unity between the workplaces and the streets, that she is also a fighter for women's liberation. And she has everything in common with the women who are fighting against the military council in the streets. But she also has something extra. She has something extra because she's in a very powerfully organised workplace. If Cairo airport stops, then the country stops to a large extent. They're an incredibly powerful force that we have in the workplaces. And I think that is absolutely the key to seeing the revolution deepen and continue. And that everything must be done to make sure that the struggle for women's liberation is also part of that struggle organised through the class.
Hello, my name is Hirut Mesfen. I'm from Ethiopia. I've never done this, but I have to, because this woman changed the lives of many African women. And I feel compelled to stand here, thank her, in the name of all African women, from Tunisia to South Africa, from Ethiopia to Nigeria. African women, Egyptian women set unprecedented level of movement that probably didn't happen since the colonial days. And this means a lot, because what we need to understand is that women are the soul of the family, not only the country. Women work on the field, women work in the export processing places, women raise the children, and it's fundamental that women get involved in politics. But within this framework, what I want to state is that one of the beauty of poor countries, in a way, is that politics is not the field for the elite as such. Politics is an everyday experience that people live, talk, feel as they walk and work in their daily lives. And what I wanted to say is, for us to progress, for us to go forward, what we need is solidarity, global solidarity among women. Liberation does not mean in what you wear, and I agree in what you say. Just because a woman is walking around in burqa doesn't mean that she doesn't understand what goes on around. In fact, many of these women are highly liberated, highly educated, well-informed in global activities and events that's taking place. And we shouldn't be judging them. In a way, what we need to do is just support them. So where there is solidarity and support and understanding among women, all these issues that are affecting us globally will be dealt with, and it is the first step. So, Gigi, thank you so much. You've opened the floor, and we'll go forward. Okay? Thank
you. I'm so excited about what's happening in Egypt and the whole MENA region, and of course spreading to other things we've seen in OWS and things happening in Russia and now China. And a couple of points I'd like to make are that really, in Egypt, obviously, the nature of that process is coming from such a depressed level of society under the dictatorship and imperialism for so long that, frankly, we have to keep our judgments relative to that and not be a bit Western about this. I think it's absolutely fantastic that after the scaff bastards had that woman sexually assaulted in Tahrir Square and then stuck it on the internet to try and intimidate women, to threaten women. You come on the streets, this is what we'll do to you. We humiliate you and sexually assault you. And then what happened in the next 12, 24 hours? I found on the internet 9 Egyptian cities. If you know more, please tell us. Tens of thousands of women walked out. All kinds, old, young, workers, low middle class. And their slogan was, the women of Egypt will bring down the dictatorship. Comrades, I suggest, we had the Women's Liberation Movement, which started in 1963 when a group of very brave trade union women went to the TUC and said, look, you fat bureaucratic bastards on £100,000 a year. We want equal pay. Right? And they were forced to TUC, which was appalling then. The early 60s was not like the late 60s at all. They forced them. And we began a campaign which involved strikes by cleaners. And now that came the Women's Liberation Movement, not feminism. Feminism to me is a lot of middle class stuff. This was the working class women. And they fought the cleaners. I suggest, comrades, we have to prepare, not only for the fact the Egyptian revolution could, as Anne has pointed out with various processes, become a revolutionary workers-led movement, but we have also the birth of the Women's Liberation Movement in Egypt by those women in those cities, those 9 cities, which of course is now on all the blogs all over the Middle East. The people are tweeting and everything about this. Right, we have to understand we must play up to the revolution too, because the Western imperialism desperately trying to play it down as a bunch of terrorists there, a bunch of terrorists here. No, this is working class people who've been ground down for years, getting them off their knees and showing us what we've got to do, A, to support them, and what we've got to do to the ruling class and their collaborators in the TUC General Council.
It's really inspirational to be here, because obviously as socialists we celebrate the Russian Revolution, but actually not just as historical fact, but the fact that the process of revolution playing out in our lifetime, and that to me is inspirational in itself. But you see, it takes up the questions, because often, even here and now in Britain, the issue of the struggle for women's liberation is presented as somehow separate to any other struggles. So I've been in a recent meeting when we were talking about, you know, the November the 30th strikes and how we could make them as big as possible, the demonstrations. And I talked about, you know, the trade unions at the heart of it, how other people would come on board. And the woman got up after me and said, well, Amy's talked about the workers, I'm going to talk about the women. And it was like as though they were completely separate from that struggle. And the fact that it missed the point that actually over 50% of those people on strike were women. And actually the whole point being that actually the most gains have been made for women when we fought as a class, either here in Britain or in other countries. And really that's where you see that struggle against the Tsar in Russia, against founding a whole different society, brings about massive gains. And you know, it makes me laugh when they talk about actually how backward countries are in the world today. Let's just look at the comparison. The Russian Revolution institutes abortion on demand. They're rolling back the clock in America on this issue. There's lots of states where you can't even get this anymore. Never mind the other things of childcare, canteens, all the different things that you talked about that show a different possibility. But you see, I also think the process of struggle changes how women are seen. And this was the funniest thing, you know, when commentators were discussing on Radio 4 and things what was happening in Egypt, it was like they couldn't believe women were involved. I remember, I think it was John Humphreys on Today, who was interviewing a leading woman. He was like, but you've been in Tahrir Square, and you've been there all night, and this is what women are doing. He couldn't understand, because it didn't fit with his stereotype of women there, and necessarily here. And I think the thing is as well, it changes not only how women are seen, but how we see ourselves as well when we're involved in that struggle. Because I don't know, maybe that woman never saw herself as a fighter. She's been given a confidence by a wider fight. You think about, there was a brilliant picture that was actually at one of the other meetings at Marxism about the media, and it showed a young woman on one of the demos against EMA being cut, kicking a police van. Maybe she never saw herself in that way. She might, you know, all the stereotypes that women do buy into ourselves sometimes about how we should look, how we should behave, get broken down in that whole process, and a sense of how we have power to transform society, really. And the last thing really is that our power comes when we fight as a class, but the ruling class always wants to divide us, where it's West against East, Muslim against Christian, men against women. But the needs of the struggle give an objective drive to unity. We have to fight for those ideas. And you think about, for us in Britain, learning from this, we're going into an autumn of massive class struggles, which will bring together people in the millions, whether it's on the streets of a TUC demo, on the strikes. There are lots of different ideas in their heads about how they see each other. But that objective need to fight together can start transforming not only our society, but how we see ourselves and our role in it as well.
So what I'm interested in is the fact that there's a fight for equality also within the left movement and within the revolutionary movement. And I wanted to ask Gigi how that fight is taking place in Egypt. When I was in Egypt recently, I was in Tahrir Square with friends of mine, and it was a great day. We'd been on a huge demonstration, the demo that took place from all the houses of the martyrs to the square after the sentence in Mubarak's trial. And I made the mistake of going through Tahrir Square. A lot of women said to me afterwards, big mistake, you shouldn't have walked through the square. Unfortunately, I was harassed on my way from one end of the square to the other. And this was difficult because Tahrir was such an important place for me as a safe place for Egyptian women after the revolution, and people had been saying it was like day 19, but I heard that during the 18 days it wasn't like that. And although I came to terms with what had happened, because as you say, these are thugs, these are people sent to the square, and these are not the people that are safe around you, what I found difficult was discussing with comrades and friends afterwards who said, well, women ought to leave the square after 11, it's not safe for women after 10 o'clock. And having to have that discussion felt really, really important, and I didn't feel like I had enough time to finish it, and it will start again the next time I'm back, of course, because I think there's a real fight within the movement as well, and I wondered if Gigi could talk a little bit about what you do to have that debate within the left movement.
I had a completely different contribution in my head to make, but I'm going to try and respond to the last speaker just off the top because it would or it changes the framework of what needs to be said. I was going to say about the way in which Islamophobia has coloured so much of the reporting and so much of the perceptions of the struggle in Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East, often for many on the left. Now, and I was going to refer to the way, and I still will, to the way in which the incidents of sexual assault that occurred, sometimes on journalists, were reported. And when they were reported, of course, there was an edge to it. It was left ambiguous, but the impression that was given to people, of course, was it was the revolutionaries who were carrying out these sexual assaults. And that's exactly what you would expect in a Muslim country and so on. And I just, in response to what the last speaker said, I just want to say a couple of things about this. That one of the ways in which prejudice works, and it works the same way against black people, for example, is that when you get indefensible actions taken by them, for example, if you get a murder committed by a black person, that becomes racialised. When you get a murder committed by a white person, it doesn't. So that, for example, nobody thinks that after the Yorkshire Ripper that there's something wrong with Yorkshire people. Do you see what I mean? It's a different kind of phenomenon, but it's difficult to untangle. The other thing I wanted to say on this is about the way in which Islamophobia creates this obsession over the question of the veil, the hijab, the niqab, and so on. And it relates also to what happened in Russia. There's a myth, on the left actually, that the Russian Revolution liberated Muslim women in Central Asia and so on by taking the veils off their heads. There was an excellent article in International Socialism by David Crouch a few years ago that showed that wasn't what happened at all. That the taking the veils off women's heads was a Stalinist measure. The Bolsheviks were much more sensitive in their approach to Muslim women in the regime. That was like liberating women in the same way they liberated peasants by forced collectivization under Stalin. Didn't liberate them at all and so on, and it was a disaster. And the last point I want to say on this is that the way in which the question of the liberation of women proceeds through the struggle is not linear and not simple and doesn't follow a kind of Western Enlightenment schema of first you go through a process of secularization, then you take off your veil, and then later maybe you come to revolution. It doesn't work that way. A wonderful example of that was provided by the revolution in the Yemen, when the president, the beleaguered president of the Yemen, thought, I know what I'll do. I'll attack the demonstrations because they've got women on them, and I'll say it's un-Islamic for women to be on the demonstrations. What happened in that situation was about 2 days later, the women of Yemen came out in hundreds of thousands to say, yes, it is Islamic for women to demonstrate, and they came out in their hijabs, in their niqabs, and so on. Now, if you sit over in Britain and say, no, what ought to have happened is they should say, no, we're not Islamic, we'll take our veil off first, and then maybe we'll demonstrate. No, it doesn't work that way. The logic of the revolution means that they demonstrate and will make revolutions, hijabs and all. I always give this example to people in Ireland, in exactly the same way as people didn't all become atheists before they rose up against British rule and took part in the Easter Rising and so on. It doesn't work that way round.
My name is Tafaz Gwachoto from the International Socialist Organization of Zimbabwe. I just want to say that the events that took place in Egypt really inspired the working class of Zimbabwe. We have been involved in a struggle against the dictatorship of Mugabe since '95, and also demanding bread and butter issues. There was real excitement on the ground that, if the Egyptians have done this, Why shouldn't we? We've been in this struggle for long. I just want to highlight that the capitalist system uses religion and culture to oppress the working class, especially women, to bound them with chains not to participate in the struggle. But what has since happened since the Egyptian revolts has changed the situation. Last year, 45 of us were arrested while still watching video clips just like this on what had happened in Egypt and discussing the lessons that could be learned from Egypt. When police cells for about 5 days and later on thrown into prison. When we went into prison, the second day, we were asked to do hard labor work. And in Zimbabwe, the rule is that if you have not yet been convicted, you are not supposed to do hard work. The first day, women did because they were afraid. There were 11 of us. We're not so certain after the process, the harassment that we'd gone through. We're kind of scared. We did that hard labor. But second day, women just said, no, we can't do this. We are not yet convicts, and we are not going to do it. The prison authorities tried to force us, and they said, no, we can't do it. And then after that, after we won a refusal to do hard labor, we were then called to go to a place and do some Bible lessons. And interestingly, there's this woman, a very strong activist, who has been part of us. She's 65. When we got there, she just stood up and said, no, we don't want these Bible lessons. You want to make us feel guilty, but we are not guilty. We did nothing wrong. What we're doing was just discussing bread and butter issues, how to improve our lives. There was really excitement from other women. And one woman said to a prison guard, if women in Egypt remove their veils to join the struggle, why not us? We are not going to do the Bible. And right up to the time they were released, and when I remained behind myself, I stayed there for a month. Right up to the end, there were no more Bible lessons. So this has shown that the struggle goes on, some of these things that are used by the system to justify the oppression of women are removed over. And it's exciting right now that women in Zimbabwe, the struggles have started again, though on a small scale. The government workers' strike and the private sector that took place, women were also part of it. But it is interesting to note that the women who are unemployed were demanding to join the strike, to say, we also want jobs for our children, we want a living wage for the workers. So they were forcing the ZCTU, they've actually forced the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions to become part and parcel of the struggle. And I'll end by saying that last week, 9 women were arrested while participating in a demonstration demanding the end to the constitutional process that has been taking place since 2009, that ZANU-PF has dragged on and on just to frustrate the people. So even though women have been harassed together with the ordinary working class of Zimbabwe, they are looking forward to the next phase of the struggle to take on the regime, the dictatorship.
Hi there. I hope I'm gonna sound articulated because microphones really scare the shit out of me and I become very self-conscious. My name is Joana. I am Portuguese and I'm a student in London. I was very happy with the contribution by one of the male comrades. He's there. Until he said that he thinks that feminism is a lot of bourgeois bollocks, which I totally disagree with. I've always been a left-wing activist in my country since I was quite young. I was a communist party member, and I've always been a feminist as well. And I think feminism is, we could say in a very basic way, a recognition that there is gender-specific discrimination and exploitation, so it's not a bunch of bourgeois bollocks. And I also wanted to say that there is so many examples of extremely important and revolutionary bourgeois, fighters throughout history. You know, lots of very important people had a bourgeois origin. So, you know, I think sometimes we have to be careful when we go down this strip of class and working class, because of course we are waging a war against a class system, but let's not go down that road, because sometimes it seems like when it's about men and revolutionaries originating from a bourgeois origin, you know, we don't really talk about it, but when it comes to women and feminism, it's one of the... I'm 3 times more nervous than I was already and shaking all over the place. I also wanted to say, like, I don't know, I don't want to carry on with this thing, but I just, you know, my country had a fascist dictatorship for over 40 years. Many of its freedom fighters and revolutionaries were left-wing, you know, bourgeois women like my mother, who was in prison and suffered a gender-specific type of torture in prison. And slowly the women in my country are coming out, working class, bourgeois, whatever class origin they had, but as freedom fighters. And they are slowly coming out and talking about their gender-specific discrimination within the party, within the revolution, within imprisonment, and I think this is very important for us to acknowledge and to listen to them. I just wanted to say, in terms of what you were saying, I thought there was a very problematic thing, and I'm sorry, I hope I didn't misunderstood you. When you say, you know, women are not, you know, they're not hated because they're women, and you showed that in famous picture of a woman with a bra out being carried by the army. Well, I do think women for sure were being punished twice, and this has to be, I think, very clear for us, left-wing Marxists. Women were being punished not also because, you know, they were revolutionaries and they were fighting one type of power, but they were also being punished for not obeying to traditional gender roles, for occupying a public space which is a traditional male domain. So we really have to be aware of this. And hate, I think sometimes when hatred is mentioned, it's not to be taken literally. You know, it's talking about misogyny. And misogyny is expressed, you know, it's ingrained at the basis of our social organizations. It's expressed in policies. It's expressed in so many cultural expressions. So, you know, like hatred making mention to misogyny, I think it makes a lot of sense, as racism in a very basic way makes mention to a very specific type of hatred as well. For sure our society is misogynistic. For sure we need to think about gender-specific type of exploitation and discrimination. And for sure we need to wage class war, but we also need to wage a war against classic gender roles. Thank you.
From Cardiff, and I just wanted to say something very short about the way that I think the trade union struggles that we've seen over the last 2 years have really built the confidence, I think, of a lot of very young women who are now starting to see the other sides of it other than just trade union issues. We've, I'm very proud. I'm in a tax office in Cardiff. When we have picket lines now, we have about 22, 25 people, and most of them are young women, mostly under 30, and I think that's something that's quite amazing. They're brilliantly organised picket lines. People bring all sorts of things, and it's, you know, it's far better than anything else I've ever been on anywhere. But you know, I think there's something there now. Because we know that, you know, the attacks, and people have mentioned that, you know, most of the strikes being like sort of 70% women, we've started to see how that started to build people's confidence. We've been on demonstrations, we've been on marches, we've been on picket lines. And something happened in Cardiff recently which I was really, really proud of. Somebody spotted on Facebook, somebody I know from a demonstration and picket line, somebody spotted on Facebook that the Society of the Protection of Unborn Children, SPUC, were actually going to have one of their vigils in the middle of Cardiff. Now, at 3 days' notice, we managed to mobilise 50, 60 people, men and women, through the networks that we got through the trade union movement. It was young women that had come up with these ideas. We mobilised them. We all met at the train station because it's a little urban area, and we marched up with the Trades Council banner, about 50 of us, chanting. And there was actually When we got there was about 50 of the SPUC members, and they really did not know what to do with themselves. You know, there's 50 angry women walking towards them with the Trades Council banner. You know, what is going on? But those women can see that the attacks that we're having aren't just about, you know, it's your pensions or it's your pay. You know, it's things like the, you know, Nadine Dorries with nonsense about abortion rights. It's the fact that your local sexual health clinic's probably closed. It's the fact that your maternity hospital probably closed, and your schools and your hospitals and all the services that you use. And I think we really need to make sure that we don't ever go down the route of saying, well, you know, this is a feminist issue, this isn't a socialist issue. You know, we have to bring all of these things together, because this is really, really important. And we need to use those networks that we've got and explain and build with people that those issues are all interlinked. It's all an attack from a nasty, nasty Tory government that we need to bring down. But the way that we do it is by organising and politicising those people and building the confidence of those people. Thanks.
Yeah, Talat Ahmed from Edinburgh. I just want to say something about how sexual politics and the question of struggle is actually raised within the movement, and particularly amongst socialists, because I think, you know, when the meeting started with those incredible images of women taking on the state and challenging the state forces of the police and the army, I think that, you know, for me, what it demonstrates, and it's a point that's already been illustrated, is that when the struggle is going forward, that's when ideas begin to be challenged. When the struggle is being fought together by people, in the crucible of that fight, in the crucible of that struggle, that's when backward ideas begin to be challenged and people start to question themselves, the assumptions that they've been brought up with. And that's the reason why it's been so tremendous that at the height of the struggle in Egypt, you did have the most enormous participation of women and people beginning to challenge those sexist ideas. That doesn't mean to say that as the end of the story, that is just the beginning of the story. And that's exactly, you know, the link in terms of the Russian Revolution. That's exactly what this was about. It was in the crucible of that fight of people struggling together in the revolution that you could talk about colonized ideas beginning to make sense in that concrete material reality. Now the problem is it doesn't just stand still in that situation. When the revolution takes a knockback, which it obviously has done inside of Egypt, and things are very, very tenuous right now, then of course there can be the resurgence of all sorts of conservative and backward ideas. So the fact that you have had the thugs dressed in civilian clothes and whatever else coming out, attacking women, targeting women, and I think that, you know, so like, because we live in a world which is built upon class inequality, and class inequality is also what has given rise to women's oppression and also what has given rise to racism and other things, then of course, when the reactionary forces decide that they're going to have an onslaught against the revolutionary forces, of course they're going to try and target us where they can attempt to divide us. So it doesn't surprise me that women have been targeted inside the streets of Cairo. You know, if we were to have a revolutionary situation in Britain, it would, you know, we should not be surprised if you would find that black people would be targeted for all sorts of reasons. This is exactly what happens when you're talking about a fight to the death in a revolutionary situation, because you're talking about the battle of ideas as well. Now that battle of ideas has an impact inside the movement, of course it does. The fact that those women have been attacked means that within the movement there will be those who will think, well, perhaps women shouldn't really come out onto the streets of Tahrir Square. Perhaps it is better if when we have protests, women are actually behind, on the back of the demonstration rather than leading the demonstration. Of course there are going to be the resurgence of those ideas. That's going to be inevitable in the situation that we're in, because the movement is part of the real world that we live in. But that's where the question of politics is absolutely central. The question of revolutionary politics, because when we're talking about the battle for women's liberation, there are different types of ideologies that exist within the movement as to how you take that fight forward. You know, there are those who are going to hold different types of feminist ideas, and feminism is not just one form. There are lots of different strands of feminist thought. You know, there are going to be those who are bourgeois feminists, there are those who are going to be radical feminists, there are those who are going to call themselves socialist feminists, but also, for me, as a member of the SWP, we have a revolutionary Marxist tradition about women's liberation that Cathy talked about in her talk. And in the battles that are going to come, whether it's in the streets of Cairo, whether it's in the streets of Athens or in London, we are going to be engaged in having to have a fight about our world vision. And that includes, obviously, about women's liberation. And we are going to have to challenge some of the resurgence of backward ideas, because struggle never stands still. Ideas never stand still. When struggle goes forward, that's when backward ideas begin to be challenged. And it's never the end of the story. It's just the start of the story. But whenever things begin to go backwards, whenever there is a knock that the movement takes, then of course you're going to see the return of backward ideas. So it doesn't surprise me that that horrendous thing that Nadine talked about in her contribution could happen to her when she goes across to Tahrir. Because this is the real world that we live in. And the question and the duty of revolutionary socialists in terms of fighting for the real genuine tradition of women's liberation, and for me that genuine tradition of women's liberation cannot be separated from the battle against class society. That is what we're going to have to fight for. And it isn't going to be easy. I mean, we have living proof here, both as a historical example of Kollontai and the living proof of what's happening in Egypt, that these ideas are not straightforward. The movement is not easy. There is not one simple, straightforward road that we're going to be taking towards revolution. It is going to be complicated, and we're going to have to fight all the way, including with those who are on our side as well, because they will not share completely the ideas of prosecuting a successful and unrelenting war against the ruling class, because that's what it is going to take in terms of taking the revolution forward.
I would like to thank all the contributors, because some of the points that were brought up were very important, and those are the debates that we are having in the movement or in Egypt in general. Of course, when we talk about sexual harassment or any kind of act of sexual assault to women in Egypt, I mean, nobody can actually understand at all what this feels and what this means to a girl or to a woman who's walking down, whether it be a street or Tahrir, and who gets sexually assaulted. It's really horrific. It's really horrific. And we were brought up as Egyptians. Many Egyptians have been brought up in a way where you look the other way. You don't fight. You don't talk back. You just look down and you just keep walking straight and hope that nobody will come at you. But it becomes really difficult, and that's when theory and all these slogans become really hard to put in action, because how am I gonna deal with, like when Nadine was saying, how am I gonna understand that this is a thug or that this is the system, or even if it's a person who is actually committing sexual harassment, how do I cope with it, or how do I become okay with it when I'm so deeply hurt and assaulted? And I personally, I fight back. I do not stay quiet. I do turn around and I do slap the bastard. I do. And honestly, the old way is not gonna work anymore. And yes, to the comrade who spoke about hate and all of this, and not and gender specific discrimination. Of course it exists, and I'm not denying it, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist in our society. And this is where I spoke and I first started my talk with, is that we do need to analyze the roots of this. I mean, it's not the fact that I'm saying that we have no women problem, or all the problems that do exist are by the police and all. No, there are deeply rooted problems, like there is in all of the world, and even like the advanced democracies, and even here in Britain, you fight, you're still fighting for women's rights, and we're just starting in Egypt, so give us a break. I mean, but it's much more complicated than that, because when you get dictatorship and you get imperialism and capitalism all in one, I mean, you get really screwed as a woman, especially as a woman. And yes, when you say that women get it twice, yes, but still, I mean, believe that this picture of the girl being beaten, no, she wasn't beaten twice because she's a woman. This happened to a man. There is a picture in this, in the same scene, of a man who's Ahmed Hassan. He's a revolutionary socialist comrade. He's a student from the Cairo University who, like, the soldier jumped on him. He jumped on his body. So yes, they will fight against you, they will beat you up, not simply because you're a woman. Yes, the women will have another attack, but definitely when it comes to the battle zone, when it comes to resisting the police, everybody gets assaulted, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, because of your politics, not because of your gender, and I still stand behind that statement. And yes, we need to debate and we need to fight back and we need to not feel guilty for being sexually harassed in a country that lived under dictatorship for years, and this has been an ongoing practice, but then enhanced by the police and the thugs and the counter-revolution war against revolutionaries, including revolutionary women and workers' women and all of this. But we need to fight back. We need to fight back. We need to stand against this oppression, and I think that the question of class and capitalism and the women oppression is very, very relevant. I mean, if you look at it through a class point of view, you will find that, I'm sorry, but bourgeois women or like the elite women, they will not be handled in the same way by the police as a working class woman or as a lower class woman. There is a difference. I'm sorry, there is a difference. And even for I mean, I do come from like an upper middle class family. I'm not ashamed to say so, and I will be treated differently compared to, you know, a street homeless woman. Of course I would be treated differently by the police. Of course I would be treated differently, not because of the gender, but because of my class. And this is something that we have to admit and look into, because it is about class and it's not about gender. But with that said, we do have to fight for gender rights and for more rights for women, because women's rights are part of human rights. I mean, women are not separate from this whole, species. Like we do need equal rights for everybody, and this will not be achieved until the revolution is achieved, until workers are in power and everybody is liberated. Thank you very much.
I'll just be really quick because we're running over. You know, as Marxists, we have the ideas. We have the ideas about women's liberation, and what we see in Russia, actually, as women joined the revolutionary struggle, we saw reaction. I mean, reaction to ideas. There were no actual strong opposition. There was just reaction. And what you saw in the Civil War with the whites, all the generals, you know, and the businessmen, and who joined the armies to keep their privileges and their epaulettes, and massively backed by the West, of course. You just saw it was just a reaction. They had no ideology. Interesting that the day after the revolution, the American ambassador in Moscow said, some sort of Bolshevik government in power, woman in the government, disgusting. I think, and again, when you saw the absolute capitalist encirclement that dripped its poison into Soviet life over the next years, it was just racism and sexism. Actually, women in the government, disgusting, Bolshevik barbarism, Russian barbarism. Very, very closely allied to fascism. I mean, to go off, it's very important actually to talk about the way that the whites, the capitalist-backed white opposition to the Bolsheviks were actually prototypical fascists. I mean, notably with, Baron Rosenberg, who was a white general who then left to go to Germany and became one of the architects of the Nazis' race extermination policies. So all I would say to end on a positive note is that we have the ideas. We've written the book on, as Marxists, not we personally, but we are part of the tradition that has written the book on gender, class, and sexual and women's liberation, and so we don't need to be bothered about, I don't think, wondering about whether we're feminists or not. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, it's terminology. Yeah.